what's interesting about today and court in general around this is they are very much focusing on the Shamima Begum of 2019 when she emerged and she made some very inflammatory statements. The legal side of things doesn't really look at the Shamima Begum who was 15 years old and doesn't really look at the Shamima Begum of today.
Let's just turn our attention to some breaking news just come in from the Court of Appeal, where Shamima Begum was challenging the removal of her British citizenship. You'll remember it was back in 2015, at the age of just 15, she left her home in London to travel to Syria to join the Islamic State group when she was found in a camp in Syria in 2019 by our colleague, wasn't it? It was by Anthony Lloyd.
By Anthony Lloyd in 2019,
the Times war correspondent. She was subsequently stripped of her UK citizenship by the then Home Secretary, Sajid Javid. That was, back in 2019. She's been fighting the case ever since. Had taken it to the Court of Appeal, and we've just heard she's lost that Court of Appeal challenge over the removal of her British citizenship. Let's hear from Lady Chief Justice Dame Sue Carr.
In conclusion, for these reasons, we unanimously dismiss the appeal. It could be argued that the decision in Miss Begum's case was harsh. It could also be argued that Miss Begum is the author of her own misfortune. But it is not for this court to agree or disagree with either point of view. Our only task is to assess whether the deprivation decision was unlawful. We have concluded it was not, and the appeal is dismissed.
Now, lots of people listening to this, Patrick, will remember she was only 15 at the time, but ultimately she did go and join Islamic State.
And that is the government's case in a nutshell, that they lawfully deprived Shamima Begum of her citizenship on national security grounds. That's the case the barrister for the government, Sir James Eadie KC, was making in court this morning. He was saying, look, notwithstanding the fact she was a child when she arrived, she was a known supporter of an extremist group. She made a conscious decision to go and join an extremist group. And so, having been radicalised, there is a tangible national security risk in allowing her back in. Shamima Begum's lawyers have made the case that the government had not taken into account the fact that she had been trafficked and groomed, but the justices today have rejected that argument. And this, the government will breathe a sigh of relief. This has been going on for 5 years, and for a government that is already sort of on the run from people on the right of the Conservative Party and Reform UK over the issue of borders more broadly. Obviously, this is a special case. It would have been a PR disaster for the government to lose such a totemic and symbolic case, and there will be sighs of relief on Whitehall, I'm sure.
Patrick, good to see you. Patrick Maguire, Times Radio senior political correspondent. So just that breaking news the last few minutes. Shamima Begum losing her appeal over the removal of her UK citizenship. She remains in northern Syria, and any hope, I think, of returning to the UK has passed with that ruling for the Court of Appeal.
Shamima Begum, who left the UK as a 15-year-old schoolgirl to join Islamic State. We'll find out today whether her appeal against the removal of her UK citizenship has been successful. Josh Baker is a journalist who's closely followed her story. He presented the podcast Shamima Begum, I'm Not a Monster. And he's going to be in the Court of Appeal to hear the judge's ruling this morning. Morning, Josh.
Good morning. Sorry, it's the Shamima Begum Story, just so you're the title.
OK, Shamim Begum Story. I should know that because I've listened to all of the podcasts and absolutely love it.
Thank
So
you for
apologies,
listening.
Josh.
I'm very grateful. Appreciate that.
Just remind us what exactly is going to happen today.
So basically, Shamima Begum's lawyers have been in court arguing that when the government took away her citizenship, they didn't follow procedure properly and they failed to consider the fact that she was actually a victim of trafficking. Now, obviously, the British government say that she is a threat to the country and that she should not be allowed back. Today, we will find out the sort of judgment of that appeal, whether she's won or whether she's indeed lost, and then her lawyers will look to pursue other means, I imagine.
Yeah. Where is she at the moment?
So Shamima has been in a Syrian detention camp, a Syrian prison camp, since 2019 when she emerged from the ashes of the so-called caliphate. Now, she's there held with other women and children who were with ISIS. And essentially her life is very limited. She lives in a sort of a makeshift sort of white tent. Imagine a sort of refugee camp set up. And her days are very limited. She hasn't got a lot that she can do. And this is sort of where she lives out her life at the moment.
There's huge implications for this ruling, isn't there? Because if we look at other countries around the world, there have been very different approaches to whether people take these women and indeed children back who lived in Islamic State territory. We seem to take quite a different approach here.
Yeah, you're completely right. Look, so that basically we need to remember that more than, around 30,000 people conservatively from around 100 nations travelled to join the so-called Islamic State group. After the fall of the so-called caliphate, there was a real mixed bag approach about what you do with the survivors. Now, a lot of European countries have taken their citizens back, so has the US. But Britain and a few others have sort of taken the view that actually, no, we take away their citizenship and we leave them in Syria. And so Britain is sort of increasingly, I would say, a bit isolated in this policy.
And it became quite personal, didn't it? I remember when initially she was stripped of her citizenship. It was people felt a personal connection to this story and a real anger that a young girl could choose to turn her back on our country and go to Islamic State. It felt very much at the time, and I wonder if you feel this has changed, that there wasn't much public sympathy for her.
Yeah, I think you'd be right. There's kind of two different narratives about Shamima Begum. There's the narrative of the girl who was 15 years old when she left here, somebody that was groomed, somebody that was a victim of trafficking and, should be seen as such. And then there's the narrative that comes from 2019 when she emerged from the ashes of the caliphate, the so-called caliphate. And she said some pretty unsavoury things that enraged the public. Now, what's interesting about today and court in general around this is they are very much focusing on the Shamima Begum of 2019, when she emerged and she made some very inflammatory statements. The legal side of things doesn't really look at the Shamima Begum who was 15 years old and doesn't really look at the Shamima Begum of today. It's very much focused on quite a specific time in history.
And so today, if she was to get her citizenship back, she would be able to come back to this country. If not, is this the end of the road for her and her appeals?
It's not quite that simple. I wouldn't see this as the absolute Shamima Begum, if she wins today, is coming home.
Right.
It will be essentially the next chapter of that process, where her lawyers are obviously fighting to bring her back to her home in Bethnal Green, East London, that she left. But it's not going to be a clear process. Undoubtedly, the government will look for grounds to appeal. Undoubtedly, there will be more legal proceedings to come. So I think the way to view this is just the next stage in what has been a very long journey by her lawyers to try and bring her home.
Josh, thanks ever so much. I know you've got to nip now into the Court of Appeal, so I'm grateful to you for talking to us. Thank you so much, Josh.
Take care. Bye-bye.
That is Josh Baker. He's a journalist. He's followed the story of Shamima Begum. He's going right into the Court of Appeal now to look at that judgment, kindly agreeing to talk to us. His podcast is I'm Not a Monster, the Shamima Begum Story.